Hey folks, welcome back. This is a screencast that is going to talk about how we can take a big, large data set and make it into something that's much more manageable. And so um, I've got the 2020 value survey downloaded and sitting on my computer. And so I've got three things that I'm going to have you take a look at, and then we're going to jump right into work. Again, the primary purpose of what we're doing here is we are going to create code to make a smaller version of a large data set, and then we're going to save that syntax as a syntax file in the future in case we need to rerun it, adding a variable in case we forgot something. So let's get going here. I'm going to go ahead and make my picture disappear, and off we go. So you can see right now I'm working with a folder that has a data set. The pre-2020 value survey originally was in Stata, and I needed to import that into SPSS, which I did within the program, and then I saved it as the original copy of that data set. I then made a copy of that data set so that if I were to mess up anything in this process, I don't have to go back online and download everything. Then I also have the questionnaire from the survey, and we'll take a look at that in a second. So this is the folder where I've got all of my data. It's in my documents folder, and I've got it in a string of areas so that I'm going to be able to find it in the future. And so in this case, because this is an example, it's in my research methods SPSS work folder. And inside of there, I've got a folder indicating that this is where all of this data set's going to go. All right, so I've got the full copy of the data set already open. Before you do anything, if you are doing a Mac, yours is going to look a little bit different than what you've got, what you're seeing here. You're going to have the icons across, right? But these menus are right here are going to appear at the top of your screen in your general embedded Mac issues. Let me say this, let me emphasize this. On the website, on my website, when you first downloaded and installed SPSS, you were told that you needed to reconfigure your SPSS so that it will work the way that it's supposed to in the PC version. Some of what I'm going to do in here is going to, in this screencast, is going to involve pasting code. If you have not properly configured the Mac to work and look like a PC, when I get to that part of the screencast, you're not going to have the paste option, and that is going to be a problem for you. So if you get partway through and you do not have the paste option that I have, that means that you need to go back and you need to configure your Mac. It takes all of about 30 seconds, especially if you need to do it more often than once. In the past, you haven't had to, but I don't know now. All right, so let's get going here. I am in variable view. Whoops, poke that up so you can see that. In variable view, and what this tells me if I look it down is that this data set has a lot of variables, 236. Anytime I try to do any type of analysis or if I try to split the data, I am going to see 236 options. That's a mess. Sorry about that. And that's why we're going to cut this data down. Just so you know, we're on data view here. And on data view, if I pop down, what this tells me is that a little over 2,500 people responded to this data set. So the variables are across the top. There are 200 plus of them. This is each respondent's answer to each of these questions or variables, and they have been coded numerically so that we can do fancy statistics on them. So that's what we've got in terms of our data set. The other thing that I've got open for right now is I've got a questionnaire. And in this questionnaire, let's say that we are doing a research project and we want to know who thinks that America has gotten better since the 1950s. So we're looking for optimists. And what we know is that when this data came out in September of 2020, about 55% of Americans thought that America was changing for the better. For what it's worth, we've been in a period of pretty rough politics, and 2020 was right before the 2020 election, and already there was lots of polarization, lots of dissension in this country, and some people will think that their moment is particularly lousy. All I can tell you is that one of the cool things that we can do with survey data is we can look at very similar questions, or in this case, identical questions over time. And for what it's worth, if you go back to February February 2013, people who were asked about life in the last 50s, 54% thought that things had gone for the worse versus 44 in the more recent time. 40% thought that things were getting better and changed for the better versus 55 in September 2020. In other words, if you look at the data and you look at the change over time, as this question was asked repeatedly, the idea that a particular figure in American politics, for example, the emergence of Donald Trump, that cannot possibly explain why Americans think that things might have changed for the worse, simply because if you look at these numbers, the trends are happening before Donald Trump came onto the political scene, or for that matter, Joe Biden, if you're thinking about the more recent presidency. So there you go. If I were doing a research project, I might want to look at the factors that cause people to think that America is changing for the better. I might do which factors determine this in 2020 versus what determined it in 2013. And so what we're going to do is we're actually going to retain the variables that might allow us to answer that. So I'm going to need to keep question number 3, but I don't want to keep everything else. So let's show you how you do that. First time that I go into SPSS, I've got these 200 variables, right? I want to have a much smaller data set. In order to do that, I have to identify the question. So number 3 right here is one that I'm going to want to keep. But for just the sake of this project, I'm also going to identify a number of independent variables. And we're going to look at things going down to the bottom like age. Maybe older people are less optimistic. We're going to look at gender. Maybe women are more optimistic. We're going to look at race and ethnicity. Things have gotten better for non-whites over the last several decades. So we might look at that. Education, if you have more of it, you're likely to control more of your future. So maybe that makes you more optimistic. Maybe your region matters. Maybe your religion matters. So let's keep a handful of variables. And then, of course, your party matters, perhaps, right? Because we've had candidates running on Make America Great and this type of thing. So maybe it matters. So we want a handful of variables in here, and we don't need the rest. So let's identify those variables in a way that will give us a list. The easiest way to do that is to go to Analyze, Descriptive Statistics, Descriptives. We're actually not going to get the descriptive statistics. We're not interested in them, but we're going to use this command so that we can identify the variables and get a list of them all in one place. So I hit Descriptives. And there you go. I got my 200 variables to choose from. What a pain in the butt. Now, if I right-hand click on a PC or I two-finger it on the Mac touchpad, I can display variable names instead. And I could sort them alphabetically. I'm not going to do that, but I am going to keep variable names because it allows me to find what I'm looking for a bit more quickly. I know, for example, that I want question number 3. That is my dependent variable. It's the thing that I want to explain. I think that a person's religion may have something to do with this. I think that a person's party may have something to do with this. If I go down to the bottom, it could be that your optimism is impacted by the region that you live in, your education, your race and ethnicity, your gender, and then we'll call it your age. Notice how many variables I've got in there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right. If you've configured your Mac correctly, and if this doesn't work, we'll have to get a workaround. But I think, but it should work if you've got it configured, or on a PC, you want to paste this code. Don't run it. And if you did run it, then you could just go back to Analyze and get back to here, and all these variables will be here. But let's do paste. And it's going to open up a syntax file. The syntax file is where I boss SPSS around. And I don't need this dataset activate line. It just tells me to open up the current dataset, which is labeled dataset 1. We don't need that. We want this code to run on whatever dataset we've got open. So I took that off. And now I'm going to make a note. Identify the variables. Variables I want to keep. And you'll notice I started with this with an asterisk. It's going to gray it out so SPSS doesn't run it until I add a period at the end. So I've got my first line of code, and I've got my descriptives. Okay, that's these are the variables I want to keep. I notice I didn't type them in because SPSS, if I try to enter them, I could make a mistake here. I could not capitalize something, or I could misspell, or I could do this. If I do that, SPSS isn't going to run it. So by using descriptives, I was able to identify the list of variables I need. That's step number one. Step number two, I'm going to tell SPSS that I want to save this data set. And in this case, I'm going to save it. I got to go back to my I got to go back to all the way back to my, where in the world did I put my documents folder? Because that's what I'm looking for. Let's see if we can find it this way. Going. There you go. On a PC, I can just grab this and go down there. So there's my documents. I wanted my research methods homework. I'm working with the 2020 data set. Whew, there it is. So syntax to create a small data set. I did the wrong thing here. I thought I was saving the data set, but I did it in the syntax file, and I need to save the syntax anyway with fewer observations. We were going to save the syntax later on, but if I do save as in syntax, it asks where the syntax is. We're going to do something with the data in a second, so I'll go ahead and save that. If we go down and we look at the folder now, I have syntax to create a small data set, and it's saved the beginnings of my syntax. Now let's do what I actually intended to do to begin with, which was to go to the file, to go to save as. And here it recognizes that I'm here. If I touch this, don't double click on it, just touch it. It will notice how the name is keeping here. And right now it says it's going to keep all 236 variables. Well, I don't want it to do that. So take in the copy. I'm going to name this as small. It still says it's going to keep all 236 variables. And sure enough, it's going to paste code that would keep all 236 variables. I've now labeled this my small data set. I'm going to paste it into my syntax. And so if I go down here to the SPSS icon and look at my syntax, now I've got a file that says save this big, huge, large data set as a huge, big, large data set that is now named small. So I don't want to run that. I need to tell it which variables I want it to keep, so it will be a smaller data set. So here I'm going to do a / and I'm going to type in keep, and then put an equal sign. And just to show you how this works, you should not do this. I am going to do something where I tell it to only keep people who answer the question related to born again. Notice I'm not going to put a period here. The save command starts here. The green is subcommands. There's one period at the end. So I've added one variable, and look at what happens when I run it. I've got to select it. I'm going to run it. And I'm not seeing any output because nothing went wrong. But if I look over here into the folders, maybe you saw it, maybe you didn't, a new folder popped up and it's labeled small. If we open this survey or open up this save data set, guess what we're going to find? Hopefully we find that there's one variable in there, and that is the born, and it sure is. So there you go, we got my data set. Now, let's assume that I decided actually I either don't want born again in there, or for that matter, as I actually do, I want more variables. I can go ahead and close that up. And I'm just going to delete it. So now that small data set doesn't exist anymore. But if I go back to my syntax, I can replace this born with the variables that I actually want to keep. So I copied that. I'm going to paste it here. Now I'm telling SPSS to keep a small version of that data set that only has the variables I want. And I'm going to make a note on here that says that. Keep small version of the data set. And there we go. I'm going to run it. Small just showed up. You saw it over there. I open it up, and this time it's only going to have the variables that I want. And then I can go on and do my analyses. So that, my friends, that's how you take a big, large data set and you turn it into a small data set. Now, if I go to analyze descriptive statistics frequencies, I've only got a handful of variables that I have to choose from. And I can begin to split data and do some preliminary analyses. So I might split by religion, right? So if I go data, split file, compare groups, I can compare by religion. What is your present religion? Compare groups, okay. And I can do analyze descriptive statistics frequencies, and let's choose my 1950s question that is my dependent variable, hit OK. And now I get output telling me, depending on what religion you are, whether or not you think things have mostly changed for the better or mostly changed for the worse. And I can do some quick eyeballs or make a fancy Excel chart comparing different religious groups. And that, my friends, is how you take a big data set and you turn it into a small data set. So we're done here, and I'm going to go ahead and post this.